Welcome, everyone, to episode 395 of Just Joshing. This week is story time. The Cloud Diver, Chapter 5, Part 1 is going to air live here in just a second, and my reading guest this week is Dave Butler. It's going to be a fun show, I guarantee. A couple things here. First and foremost, my latest column is up at firstcomics.com. I review a very cool comic called Wind, which really is a great book. I was really blown away by it. Definitely a fun thing. Do I talk about this now, or do I wait? I'll wait till the end of the show. So how about this? We're going to get into part one here, and then we're going to get into, from there, we're going to do a little intro to Dave, and then after Dave's done, I'll get to the end of the show. How's that sound? All right, let's get to it, shall we?
This episode of Just Joshing is sponsored by Indie Imprint. Indie Imprint supports creators by creators. Whether you are writing a book or creating a video game, Indie Imprint works with its clients to produce, edit, and present their projects to the world. For more information, check out their website at www.indieimprint.com.
The Cloud Diver, Level 1-5, Chapter 1. Feed Void Life. Account The Truth at The Truth Is Out There, unverified account. Some idiots damaged the Void Life building. Click here if you want to see crazy. Hashtag Truth Is Out There. Are we there yet, I whined. No, Gunblade said. You asked that every 10 minutes for the last 2 hours, Atlas grumbled. Children in more ancient times used to do this all the time. Are you comparing me to a child? Yes, they both said in unison. How did they deal with it, Gunblade asked. They gave the children something to do. Something like? Gunblade arched an eyebrow. I'm listening, I muttered. Yeah. Gunblade pulled out one of those cubes I saw earlier when we escaped Void Life and rolled it around their finger. Something like this would occupy their time. What are those things? I said, remembering the explosive damage they had caused. Q-Robs, Gunblade finally answered me. I know you're bored now to your death, but if you keep acting like a child, I will punch you. I gulped. I knew I was being whiny and complaining. I had nothing to look forward to. Everything I had was gone. I wondered what had gone on since Stevie Wyatt got out of here. Knowing him, he was probably getting to know some kind of spam-bot relation that was more than he bargained for. I chuckled. I was looking forward to it. Well, how about that? He got quiet, Atlas commented. You ruined it, Gunblade said. Hey, I said, mine back to the car ride. See? They laughed and I sulked. It wasn't that funny, I don't think. The chuckles made me think otherwise after a few minutes. I gave in and laughed. I almost meant it too. We all needed a laugh after the last few days. Eventually the conversation started again. Atlas surprised me yet again with sympathy. If life was fair, we'd give you a few days to cope with everything that transpired and we'd give you some proper time to prepare. But life isn't fair. Your world's going to be more chaotic, traumatic, and unpredictable if you keep going down this path. What more can possibly be taken from me, I asked. Famous last words, Gunblade shrugged. Have you lost things too? I asked. Silence answered me. I looked at Alice for some kind of assurance as Gunblade just looked forward, as if pretending I hadn't said a single word. He offered an apologetic look followed by a shrug. Uncomfortable silence echoed in the cars who covered the miles. We're almost there, Gunblade finally said. I decided to ignore being ignored and took the bait. Where are we going? We're heading to a library called Alexandria. Alexandria? It's not on any map on the grid, and it's there you'll be instructed. Gunblade's smile returned to her face, and it came with a touch of perversity and the slightest hit of a sneer in the word instructed. I winced and did my business with a gulp of a cry. What kind of teacher was Gunblade going to be? For all my confusion and disillusionment and potential arduous lessons on the horizon, this whole part of the trip went up to an uncomfortable level as the silence stretched. I've been sitting in the same seat of the same car for hours. My butt and the seat were engaged in mortal combat to see which irresistible force would mold the other. I thought my butt was winning, but I wasn't happy about it. Also, I had no idea where I was. Golden had been my life until Void Life, but I hadn't been anything outside of that little town or the big tower. It was a mostly intact asphalt road and very flat and uninteresting fields of green grass. A lot of the country had been abandoned to the corporate cities. Driving through, I saw bushes and trees filling up chunks of real estate. That picture-perfect White House with the skeleton of a picket fence now resembled a literal treehouse. This had to be one of those forsaken sections. Everyone I knew about them existing, but no one I knew had been there. My common sense told me that this was normal. Going into strange and unfamiliar places was probably a thing Atlas and Gunblade did all the time. Nothing to worry about. Another part of me wanted to type into my global positioning map to see if I could find out where I was, but I figured it was not a good idea to access the public systems. They were probably looking for me by now. We passed by a sign saying this highway would end in the next mile. I thought nothing of it until the road arched up. The road and the ground separated before my eyes as the overpass crept up and grew like a leviathan, growing farther and farther up a mysterious incline. The ground became tiny in my eyes, which bulged as the cars picked up speed. I looked ahead to see where we were going so fast, and I screamed. This bridge went nowhere. It climbed to this absurd top of the world moment, and there was another highway crisscrossed beneath it with wreckage from vehicles littering in the landscape. Atlas picked up speed and barreled up the bridge, ignoring the debris at the end of the trail below. The urge to scream, "We're all going to die," at the top of my lungs worked with what little remained of my dignity not to do it. The contents of my stomach, which wanted to leave several orifices at once, also war against the rest of my body. My heart and I were having a face-to-face conversation as we came closer and closer to oblivion. I screamed. Afterwards, I'm not sure exactly what happened. Things got kind of hazy at this point. Did I faint? No idea. All I knew for sure was that sometime while this was passing my head, the bridge, road, and sky disappeared, and the parking lot the one Gunblade had led me to in void life appeared before me. Lights and lines and concrete surrounded me. I looked back and saw the bridge actually led into this building. An illusion of some kind? Alice spun the car and I heard the wheels screech the protest as he halted the car between the lines and parked perfectly. Wasn't so scary, was it? Gunblade grinned. I wasn't scared, I whined. Uh-huh. She chuckled. Atlas was openly laughing at me. I got hazed. I wasn't sure at the moment. All I knew for sure was that my contents inside me were where they were supposed to be, and I was still alive. I stepped out of the car and unused muscles sent spasms of pain as I moved them again. I followed him through the entrance of the mysterious hideout, wondering what my place would be inside it.
Hey, I'm Dave Butler. I write for sci-fi and fantasy for adults under the name DJ
and that
Butler.
was
I'm going to read
part one, chapter
of a book of mine that is coming out this
week. Guys, like what you heard,
In the Palace
feel free to click on the link below to purchase the Cloud Diver, because why the heck not?
At Amazon.
Well,
you can come find me.
Now we got me out of the way. Let's get to our main feature here. Dave Butler is really, really good. He writes as DJ Butler as well. I'm going to let him do the introduction and we get to the conclusion. And afterwards, we're just going to talk a little bit about some stuff. So without further ado, here's Dave Butler.
But it's what you got to imagine is sort of a Thieves' World-ish kind of setting, an old, decadent city full of criminals and mercenaries, and at the same time, Mos Eisley. That is to say, this comes up in the chapter here, but a spectacular profusion of different related semi-human species. Rather than, humans and elves or elves and dwarves. All right, so chapter 1, which I'm skipping over, we meet the point of view character. His name is Indrajit Twang, and he is the epic poet of his people. He is the 427th in a line of recital thanes, and his problem is that there is no 428th. And so he's left his people in their fishing villages and come to the big city to try and find a successor, and he is failing, and he is making his living as a thug, and his bar tab is too high, and he also owes, so in the first chapter we see thugs trying to shake money out of him to pay back the bartender, and then a different group of thugs comes and intercepts him because he's broken his contract with a risk merchant, that is to say, an insurance broker named Holy Pot Diafernes. And this second group of thugs summons Indrajit to a reckoning. So that's chapter 1. Chapter 2, Indrajit is crossing the city to go to Holy Pot's shop. The cool, wet breezes of late spring blew up Indrajit's kilt and across his bare arms as he climbed the ramp from the west flats up into the spill. Higher on the knob of ruins, sewers, caves, and natural stone on which Kish perched, the spill was bounded by the east flats on the far side, and below it and to the north, the shelf. Like the west flats, the east flats and the shelf were all strewn with wharves, the shacks of fishermen, and the cheap dives the fishermen frequented. South and above the spill rose the crown, home to the temples of the city's 5 major gods, clinging like barnacles to the city's highest knuckle of stone, the spike. The spill itself was full of warehouses and shops of all kinds imaginable, or at least all imaginable goods that came to Kish by sea. The goods generally became more luxurious the closer one climbed to the crown. The spill's buildings did not have the elegance and wealth of those of the crown, nor yet did the spill reek of fish and dung smoke like the neighborhoods clinging to its sides. In the spill, business got done. At the top of the ramp, Indrajit turned into the gate leading into the spill. Like all his people, his peripheral vision was good. That came of having eyes set far apart in their faces, almost, some would say, on the sides of their heads. With his excellent peripheral vision, he could now see he was being followed. The man was a yift. They looked like any ordinary, unremarkable man, caramel brown in color and of middling height, like the race of man commonly called Kishi. But a yift could be spotted by the lashless line across his forehead that was all one could see of his third eye when it was closed. When the eye was opened, the yift were said to possess uncanny powers of vision through it, though the tales also said that every minute they held that eye open was a minute less that the yift lived. They were often employed as spies and seers by the great families, and one could find them in less exalted quarters as gamblers, hucksters, and fortune-tellers. This yift wore a dirty yellow tunic and a loincloth, a faded purple turban with a loose length of cloth hanging down over his left shoulder, and rope sandals. Indrajit had seen the man in the blind surgeon and thought nothing of him, but now the yift was following him. Indrajit stepped through the spill and breathed better. This was not the rarefied air of Bank Street or the Avenue of Heroes, but it was the air of merchants and burghers rather than the oozy smoke of vice dens salted with the oily stink of fish. Indrajit had been summoned to the paper souk in the northeast corner of the spill. The most direct route would follow most of the first leg of the crooked mile, the long street that zigged and zagged up the spill's slope to the crown. Good. This was an innocuous highway that might be taken by any traveler. Indrajit looked for an opportunity to turn the tables on his tail. His long, quick stride carried him past a cobbled square where the players of a game of street rupat threw elbows into each other's throats, kicked at each other's ankles, and pushed each other to the wall as they jostled to throw the ball through the octagonal stone goal. This was a public court, and the goal protruded from the wall of an adjacent dry goods merchant, who had probably built the court to drive traffic, or perhaps to appease some god. 1,000 races of man and 10,000 gods, though, depending on whom you asked, both those numbers could be larger. Kish itself honored 5 gods above all others, 5 gods borrowed from unrelated pantheons, rather than a pantheon native to the city. 5 gods, and, some said, a 6th. None of them was Bla'at, the sea mother. Indrajit cut across the Rupat court, earning shouts from 2 players. He smelled roasting tamarind seed pods without seeing the vendor. Ducking through an alley at the back and following it through 2 quick turns, he put himself again on the crooked mile, heading for the paper souk. He chuckled, let the yift try to follow him and catch a beating from irate players. But he stopped chuckling when he turned his head to look into the stall of a merchant selling polished copper idols and saw the yift emerge from the same alley Indrajit had used. Indrajit passed a line of robed and barefooted women, chanting a song he didn't know, some kind of doom cult. Kish was full of them. He bended the knees and walked like a bird, trying to stay out of sight. A small troop of thin, short men with ragged cloths about their hips and feathers at their knees and elbows saw Indrajit and began to follow him. Their skin was a mottled gray, and they sniffed the ground as they scooted along. Just a pack of scavengers looking for a meal. Indrajit ignored them. He passed a wealthy Bonayan man surrounded by a troop of scimitar-wielding soldiers. The Bonayan was likely noble, judging by the profusion of astral tattoos that covered his body, and by the fact that he sat in a sedan chair carried by 4 tall, pink-skinned slaves. Indrajit paced the sedan, matching his steps to those of the largest bearer, until the Bonayans turned aside. Still the yift followed. More direct action would be required. The scavenger pack hooted, sensing some kind of game and maybe an opportunity for a meal. They flashed sharp teeth and scratched at the skin of their own throats. Indrajit saw his chance in the form of a bawdy show. The actors stood on a low platform made of planks, just tall enough to raise their heads above the crowd. They projected their voices admirably, but this was no epic recitation. The actors hit each other, danced, mimed gigantic farts, and pretended to rut like beasts. One of them wore a papier-mâché mask in the shape of a horned skull, suggesting that he was supposed to be Orm Thrush. More properly, Orm Thrush VII, head of House Thrush, said to be the richest of the 7 great families of Kish and the current Lord Chamberlain. Thrush was by far the most flatulent of the characters, and also tried to hump the young female characters any time the older characters turned their backs. So the body was political. Indrajit didn't care. What he liked was the crowd, which was thick and noisy with jeers, laughter, and catcalls. The audience was getting thicker by the moment, too, growing like a zalopting warren. He turned his shoulders to slide as neatly as he could into a wall of spectators without breaking their ranks, then crossed a thin row of young peepal trees, their drooping leaves a rich dark green. On the far side, he ducked and stepped sideways, creeping out of sight until he could shelter behind the band. The musicians consisted of a girl playing a forked shepherd's flute and 2 men playing bang harps. The harpists seemed much more comfortable with their drone strings and the percussive butts of their instruments than with the fretted melody strings. Indrajit cringed at the roughness of the music. The Yift struggled to get through the crowd and passed right by the musicians. Indrajit orbited sunwise around the band to stay out of sight and almost laughed when the Yift began looking left and right frantically and picked up his pace. Moving cat-like on the balls of his feet, Indrajit rushed to catch up to the man following him. The Yift was muttering under his breath. Indrajit tapped him on the shoulder, and the Yift turned. His face was angry, and his third eye was beginning to open. Having lost Indrajit then, he was turning to his magical gift to find the poet. Indrajit chuckled as the anger turned to surprise. He saw just enough of the Yift's eye to notice that the white of the eye was a deep yellow, thick with mucus. Then he punched the Yift right in his sorcerous orb. Indrajit Twang was a tall member of a tall race of mankind, and the Yift was off balance and surprised. With a shrill yelp, the snoop dropped to the paving stones and lay still. Passers-by looked, but no one looked twice. This was Kish, after all. The Yift's third eye opened fully. Indrajit now saw that it had a horizontal iris like a goat's eye. Looking at that eye, he felt a trickle of sweat run down his back and an unsettled feeling in his stomach. Grabbing the Yift's turban in both hands, he yanked it down to cover the eye. "No fair watching me while you're unconscious," he said. With yelps of delight, the gray scavengers swooped down upon the Yift. Indrajit kicked 2 of them and then drew his knife to chase away the others. "Not for you," he called to them. The Yift had followed Indrajit, but he hadn't done anything worse than that. Indrajit dragged the unconscious man to the cluster of musicians, tossing him into their midst to keep him safe from the scavengers. The bang harp players glared and hissed, but kept playing. Indrajit resumed his walk. He picked up his pace, stepped off the crooked mile, and deliberately took alleys and byways, cutting away from the paper souk before angling back to reach it. He stopped twice at shops to pretend to examine first a saddle and then a glazed clay jar while checking for another tale. He seemed clear. Surely the Yift was Holy Pot's man, sent to make certain Indrajit complied with the summons. But Indrajit needed no urging. He owed Diaphanes Holy Pot, and he knew it. And if Holy Pot had wanted to make an example of him, he'd have had him killed in the street rather than summoned to a meeting. Unless, of course, he had a more excruciating fate than mere death in mind. What if he intended to torture Indrajit, then hang his corpse up over the paper souk as a warning to future employees? But no, surely Holy Pot had some job that needed to be done, something distasteful or dangerous enough that he preferred to call in his debt with Indrajit rather than send an employee or a more ordinary jobber. Or maybe he needed someone with good peripheral vision, or an epic poet. The paper souk was the least comprehensible of the markets in Kish, and if tales could be believed, the one through which flowed the most money. Everything traded by the merchants here sounded to Indrajit like gambling. Bets on foreign currency, bets on ownership in companies, bets on next year's prices of grain, lumber, and bronze, and counter bets to cover all the other bets. He couldn't understand for the life of him why anyone would want to trade in the paper souk, unless they simply had a taste for taking blind risks. The souk itself was square, and from dawn to sunset every day of the week was full of shouting, spitting men who handed each other chits and scratched notes onto paper with stubby bits of charcoal. The merchants who traded in the paper souk had offices in the narrow alleys around the souk, and so did the professionals who helped them: guards, lawyers, assessors, surveyors, scribes, porters, and risk merchants. Holy Pot Diafernes was one of the latter. Holy Pot's office was in the back room of a blacksmith shop, allegedly so that the noise of the smith's hammer on his anvil would prevent eavesdropping on Holy Pot's work. Or, according to other versions of the story, so that anyone trying to negotiate with Holy Pot would be distracted by the loud banging. A stone bench across the alley faced the door that opened into Holy Pot's office and served as a waiting room. A person who came to see Holy Pot didn't knock or announce himself. He sat on the bench and waited for the door to open. Holy Pot apparently had a spell that told him when anyone was sitting there. When Indrajit arrived, a man sat on the bench. He was of average height, but solid and muscular build. His complexion was dark brown, and he had large eyes set close on either side of a beak-like nose. His hair fell in a simple black bowl around his skull. He looked Sheba Albi, but they were copper-skinned, and this man had a Kishi complexion, maybe from Bot, or the Free Cities, or some cheerful mixture of all of them. Like Indrajit, the man wore a kilt and sandals. Unlike Indrajit, he was bare-chested and heavily armed. He held a long falchion lying across his lap, a spear leaned against the wall of the building beside him, and 2 knives and a hatchet hung from his wide leather belt. After looking at Indrajit, the man turned his gaze down at a sheaf of paper in his hands. "Buying risk or selling it?" Indrajit asked. He wasn't entirely sure how one bought risk, really, but he'd heard Holy Pot use the phrase. Also, staring intently at his papers made the man seem studious, like someone who might be in the trade. The man looked up, squinted, then returned to his reading. "I'm here to see Holy Pot." His voice was gentle and high-pitched. "So am I. You won't mind if I sit, then." "This is Kish," the man said. "Make your own way." A few minutes passed. Cries of dismay in the paper souk turned to hoots of joy and then back to sorrow. Runners rushed to the souk with news and rushed away with different tidings again. Indrajit fidgeted. "What are you doing here?" The other man didn't budge. "Just reading this fascicle." Indrajit nodded. "I'm Indrajit Twang." The other man didn't look up. "I'm Fix." "Are you a builder of some kind?" "Are you a minstrel?" Indrajit furrowed his brow. "What? No, why would you guess that? Your name is Twang, but I'm not carrying a harp or anything. And I'm not carrying a level or a hammer or an awl, so the fact that my name is Fix shouldn't make you guess that I'm a builder." Indrajit grinned. "To be fair, you are carrying a hatchet." Fix looked up, his expression mild. "That's for chopping people." Indrajit nodded, then cleared his throat. "Did I hear you say you're reading a fascicle?" Holy Pot Diafernes' door opened. The doorman emerged. Indrajit didn't know another name for him. He could call the man the Usher, only that would risk confusing him with Sigil Hawaza III, who was the Lord Usher, in the same way that Orem Thrush was the Lord Chamberlain. They were the heads of 2 of the great families of Kish, whose ancestors, key servants of Kish's last emperor, had stepped in to impose order when the empire fell. The doorman was the most nondescript person Indrajit knew. He was brown, like most men, but of a middling hue, with bland facial features and an average height and build, a true Kishi. His hair, if he had any, was concealed beneath a faded red turban that matched the faded red robe, the sort whose upper half was arranged to resemble an aristocrat's toga. A brooch on the doorman's shoulder was a disc of baked red clay incised with a cuneiform character. Indrajit had seen documents and other objects marked with that same sign, and they'd always been associated with Holy Pot Diafernes. "Indrajit Twang," the doorman intoned in his sexless, flat voice. "Fix." Indrajit raised his eyebrows at Fix. "If you have the same appointment I do, you must be a real piece of work." Fix laughed. "Ha!" A girlish sound, deeply incongruous with the wall-like man from which it emerged. They followed the doorman into the building. "Also," Indrajit said, "just Fix? One name?" Fix said nothing. The doorman gestured at a bead-filled doorway and stepped aside. Indrajit found that his heart was beating fast. Despite his assurances to himself to the contrary, there was no guarantee that Holy Pot hadn't brought him here to kill him. "Fix," he whispered, "does Holy Pot Diafernes want you dead?" Probably not. Fix walked through the bead curtain. Taking a deep breath, Indrajit followed. The room behind the beads was dark, lit by a pair of candles, genuine wax, not cheap tallow, standing on a single sconce beside the doorway. The atmosphere was further darkened by a thick smoke. Indrajit sniffed. Not yip or tobacco, but also nothing else he recognized. Maybe just incense. Behind a table against the far wall in front of another beaded doorway sat Holy Pot Diaphernes. He looked tall, but that was probably just the result of his being thin. His skin was the gray of a porpoise's hide, and his long arms ended in thin fingers that drummed a complex pattern on the red-stained tamarind wood of the table. Holy Pot's visible face looked directly at Indrajit and Fix, golden cat-like eyes unblinking and thin lips pressed together. His long forehead, pointy chin, and pale complexion made his face resemble the crescent moon. On the left side of Diaphernes' head was a second face. Indrajit had never seen it, and didn't know anyone who had. But that side of Holy Pot's head was covered with a veil. Exhalations where a mouth should be lifted the bottom half of the veil rhythmically, and when it rested, Indrajit could make out the profile of a long nose and chin. Indrajit had no idea what the pot was. Vaguely, he thought it meant that Diaphernes was some kind of priest, though not of one of the city's 5 favorite gods. Indrajit, Holy Pot Diaphernes purred. Fix. I'm here because I owe you, Indrajit said. The amount I failed to return. Holy Pot nodded. And the amount you failed to collect, and your fee. Fine. What's the job? Fix asked. Did Fix also owe Holy Pot money, or was he just a regular hireling, a solo jobber? What do you know about risk reselling? Holy Pot's voice sounded like that of a cat about to pounce on its prey, though his expression was mild. He had trouble pronouncing the sound B. Nothing, Indrajit admitted. Some, Fix said. Let me simplify. Holy Pot cleared his throat, emitting a soft whistle from the veiled face. One of the great families has an interest in a person. They have hired jobbers to protect her for the next 8 days, and they have taken out a risk reselling policy, which means that they pay a risk merchant, and if the person is killed or kidnapped, the great family will be paid by the risk merchant. Someone paid this family? Indrajit asked. What did they sell? No. A person is said to sell risk when he pays another person to take the risk in his place. The risk merchant on the other end of the transaction is said to buy the risk. The risk seller is only paid if the risk is realized, if the feared event comes to pass. A curious terminology, but one grows accustomed to it. That's you, Indrajit said, looking for a shortcut. You sell. No, you buy the risk. He thought he had it right. No. The risk buyer involved in this particular transaction wants to protect herself from what she regards as a high-risk contract. So she has entered into a risk reselling agreement with me. So she pays you part of the fee she earns, Fix said, and if she has to pay out to the risk assured, she collects some of that amount from you instead. My head hurts, Indrajit said. Correct. Holy Pot's face became decidedly unexpressive. What do you need from us? Fix asked. Indrajit nodded. That was the right question. I worry that the original risk merchant might be cheating. I do not think she is, but she may be. Perhaps she will kidnap this person herself, take my risk repurchasing payment from me, and then hold the person for ransom. Or the risk-assured party might do that too, Fix suggested. Risk merchanting fraud. That is also a possibility, correct. Indrajit felt he was beginning to understand. So we are going to watch the situation for the next 8 days, and if anyone tries to mess with this risk assured, or is the risk assured who is the risk assured? You will watch the object of the risk contracts, Holy Pot, Diaphernes said. If anyone tries to interfere with her, you will stop them. Does the risk merchant have jobbers at work too? Fix asked. Holy Pot nodded. Moat Gannon's crew. The handlers, Fix said. Indrajit nodded, though he didn't know anything about Moat Gannon or his crew. Why only the 2 of us? Holy Pot shrugged. I do not think it is likely anyone is cheating, only possible. so I do not wish to spend too much money. Also, I want you to keep out of sight of the handler, so I do not wish to hire a large company with a distinctive uniform. The contracts start at sunset tonight and continue until the 7th sunset thereafter, so I wish you to begin observing the object immediately. He reached under the table and produced 2 small purses, dropping them in front of the 2 jobbers. Partial payment in advance, a similar amount upon completion for Fix, and for Indrajit, upon completion, the forgiveness of all debts. They took the money. We'll need to get close to the object right away, Fix said. Who needs guarding? Indrajit asked. Who is the object? Ilsa, without peer, Holipad Diaferne said.
Just Joshing is sponsored by Wall of Wishes by Susie Vidori. Wall of Wishes is the conclusion of the Aurora-nominated trilogy by Susie. Ada and Courtney are forced to join forces as the school and the fountain are in danger of going away forever. And if the fountain is destroyed, what will that do to Ada and Courtney? Wall of Wishes is available now at Owl's Nest Books. Click on the link in the description below to place your order. Thank you, Dave, for reading. That was awesome. And guys, check out his book. The link's in the description below if you want to buy a copy of it. And I'm going to wrap things up with Jay Lavelle when this is over. But before I do that, I kind of wanted to talk about something. So, Friday, I tried to be inspirational. I said, no is negotiable. No isn't permanent. Remember that. And at least 2 or 3 people took that as a rape reference. One of them, just the way they worded that, made me go, okay, maybe I should hit a button. I kind of wish I had been asked to change it instead of just being, dealing with that. But it was what it was. And then I posted something else about, an Italian expert kind of pointing out that the virus isn't killing anywhere near as many people with the cases they have right now in Italy, which, for all I know, is true. It could be that the virus is weakening. It's a good thought. I thought it was a pleasant thought, and I thought, hey, that's good news to share. The cynicism I got with that was interesting. But I think the thing that got me was the same person that gave me that mentioned the rape reference said I should be ashamed of myself. I was a little perturbed with that. I thought about it for, a few hours, and it just so happened I stumbled across something that kind of made me put kind of everything in perspective for the moment for me with what's going on with everybody. We're all in, again, grief and the virus isn't a new thing, but I understand, I watched something and it pointed out the whole concept of what grief does. It puts people in a static emotion, and what makes this virus, as much as it will kill you, it will cause you to suffer. I don't want anybody to go through that, and I'm sorry for everybody about loss, but what makes it truly a terrifying thing is there's nothing you can really do about it. You if it hits you, if you get it, it might kill you, and that's all there is to it. It might kill your family, it might kill your friends, and it's not fair. That's the part that really, really sucks. It's not a fair and just thing. Bad things can happen in this world that you have no control over. And however you take that reality just sinks home real hard for a lot of people right now. Based on that, it's understandable why some people think it's a hoax. That's the reality is far more terrifying. That's what people are mourning and grieving, and it goes both ways. Forcefully telling people to wear your mask and do your duty, even though that never worked in kindergarten and it doesn't work now. But people do it every day. It doesn't matter if it's the right thing or not. It doesn't matter if it's factually correct or not. Right? It's the way the force is doing. You can hear it in people, how people are doing this. Grief. Flip side. You can hear also with people one of the ways you grieve, one of the ways you get control back is if suddenly you have an enemy. Maybe 5G is the enemy. Maybe there are nefarious purposes behind that. I don't completely dismiss that. And what I mean by that is I'm not saying that the virus was a concocted conspiracy scheme. But you really have to look what's going on in Alberta right now, and you can see that there are definitely bad people taking advantage of this situation. The fact that, business never stopped during this should clue people into the fact that not all is well, and bad things were going to come from this. That's real. But on the flip side, it is easy to look for enemies. Because when you find an enemy, you can actually look and see and get control back. You're doing something. You can do something. And suddenly, how everybody's behaving makes sense. I came to terms with what I couldn't control a long time ago. I have the benefit of being free. I don't have kids. If I had kids, I might be a lot more scared than I am. Then again, maybe not. Being afraid doesn't really serve anybody any purpose. But at that point, my fear, or let me rephrase that. Letting fear rule my decision making is never a good idea. Having a healthy respect for what's going on around me, maybe I'd have more of it. Probably would, and I can't blame anyone who does. But at the end of the day, the way out for all of us is coming to some form of acceptance of this, mentally at least. Going, you know what? Bad things are going to happen to me. If I wake up, you know what? I could be dead waking up anyway. There's so many things that we've taken for granted until now. And hopefully, maybe when this is over, people won't be quite so quick to take those things for granted. We only have so much time. Grief. And we're all having to come to terms with that in just a bunch of different ways. Now I understand that, I'm a lot more empathetic. Some would say, well, maybe you should be more forthright. I can't do that. You're not gonna change people's minds with trying to be a bulldog and trying to bully people into doing the right thing. That never works. That didn't work in kindergarten. It doesn't work now. You just have to we, like it or not, are gonna have to get through this together, one way or another. And hopefully what we do works. And at least for the short term, it will. But in the mile, you got to be understanding, because you're going through it too, in all likelihood. Grief. It's a universal thing right now. Anyway, that's my thought for the day. I asked that person if they were all right after they said I should be ashamed of myself. They blocked me. Such is life. Anyways, that'll do it for this episode of Just Joshing. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so in a number of different ways. Subscribe to the podcast. I'm on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher. Feel free to come say hello. I am on YouTube as well as Josh Pantalleresco. All my previous episodes are there. Outside of that, buy my book, The Cloud Diver. You guys want to have time to support the podcast, feel free to do so. If you, let's see here. Twitter and Instagram is J Pantalleresco. My Facebook page is Josh Pantalleresco, author, podcaster. Stay inspired, everybody, and good luck with whatever it is you're doing at this point. See you guys next week.
Josh.